Imagine walking a footpath in late September, the air beginning to turn crisp, and finding yourself in what looks at first glance like an untidy fence made of bushes. You brush past brambles, spot a flash of red hawthorn berries, and hear a blackbird scolding you from somewhere deep inside. You might think, fair enough, it's just a hedge. But in Britain, hedgerows are rarely just hedges. They are living archives, wildlife corridors, and, in a quietly astonishing way, a kind of countryside infrastructure that predates most of the roads we drive on. Today, I want to take you into the secret life of British hedgerows, how they're made, what they do, why they matter, and why the future of these scruffy green lines is suddenly a rather big deal. By the end, the next time you're out in the sticks and you see a hedge that looks a bit wild, you may find yourself thinking, brilliant. Leave it be. Let's start with a simple question. What exactly is a hedgerow? It isn't merely a row of shrubs. A proper hedgerow is a boundary created and maintained over time, often made from a mix of species such as hawthorn, blackthorn, hazel, field maple, dog rose, and sometimes holly. It may include standard trees rising above the line like centuries, oak, ash, or sycamore, depending on the region. Under your feet, there may be a ditch, and on the far side, a bank. That combination of bank, ditch, and woody growth isn't accidental. It's a deliberate piece of engineering, designed to keep livestock in and trespassers out, long before barbed wire was even a twinkle in anyone's eye. If you're picturing neat clipped suburban hedges, forget it. Traditional hedgerows are meant to be dense and thorny. Hawthorn and blackthorn don't apologize for themselves. They say, in effect, you're not coming through here, mate. And for centuries, that was the point. A well-laid hedge could function like a fence with a self-repairing instinct. Cut it, lay it, it grows back. Neglect it, it thickens. It's surprisingly hard to kill. Now, the history. Hedgerows are sometimes described as ancient, and in many cases they genuinely are. Some date back to the Anglo-Saxon period and earlier, marking field patterns that survived Norman rule, the Black Death, and the Industrial Revolution. Others are more recent, especially those created during the Enclosure Acts when common land was divided into privately owned fields, often with hedges planted as boundaries. Enclosure is a loaded word in British history, and rightly so. It reshaped the countryside and rural society. For some, it meant improved farming. For many others, it meant the loss of shared rights and a push towards the towns. Yet, paradoxically, some of the hedgerows we now treasure as wildlife havens were planted as part of that very upheaval. There's a delightful, slightly nerdy method used to estimate a hedgerow's age, known as Hooper's rule. It suggests that the number of woody species in a 30-yard stretch can indicate how old the hedge is. Roughly one new species per century. It's not foolproof. Landscapes are messy. Seeds travel, people plant things. But it offers a charming way to look at a hedge and read it like a text. If you count hawthorn, hazel, dogwood, spindle, and field maple all in one stretch, you might be looking at something that has been quietly minding its business since before the first railway timetables. And what is the hedge doing while we humans bicker, build, and change our minds? Quite a lot, actually. Let's talk ecology, because hedgerows are not just pretty lines on a landscape. They are habitat. A thick hedge provides nesting sites for birds, shelter for mammals, and an endless supply of insects. It's also a larder. Berries in autumn, blossom in spring, nuts if there's hazel. For a small bird in winter, a hedge is not ornamental. It is the difference between making it through the night and not. Hedgerows also function as wildlife highways. Picture a farmland landscape. Large open fields can be, for many species, like trying to cross a motorway on foot. Predators can see you. There's little cover, and food is sparse. A hedge connects woodlands, ponds, and grass margins, allowing creatures to move through the countryside with a bit of protection. Bats use them as navigation lines, following the dark, insect-rich edge. Dormice, if you're lucky enough to have them, depend on connected hedgerows to forage without being forced onto the ground. Even butterflies use hedgerows as windbreaks and nectar sources. The hedge is a corridor, and in a fragmented landscape, corridors are gold dust. Now, here's something that tends to surprise people. Hedgerows are also climate infrastructure. Not in the glossy, headline-grabbing way of offshore wind farms, but in a quiet, cumulative way. They store carbon in their woody growth and, crucially, in the soil beneath. They reduce soil erosion by slowing wind across fields and by anchoring the ground with roots. When it absolutely tips down, as it so often does, hedgerows help water infiltrate rather than race straight off the land into streams. That can reduce flooding downstream. They are, in other words, part of the countryside's plumbing. If you've ever driven through a landscape where hedges have been ripped out and replaced by vast open fields, you'll know the view can feel bleak, but the damage isn't just aesthetic. Removing hedgerows can lead to more runoff, less biodiversity, and less resilience in the face of extreme weather. And Britain has, historically, been rather good at removing hedges. In the decades after the Second World War, in the name of efficiency and food production, many hedgerows were grubbed up. Fields were enlarged to suit bigger machinery. The result was a dramatic loss of hedgerow length across the country. Blimey. The numbers can be sobering. So why are hedgerows having a moment now? Partly because we've realized, belatedly, that you can't manage a landscape purely for yield and expect everything else to muddle through. Policy has changed too. Environmental stewardship schemes have encouraged farmers to restore hedges, plant new ones, and manage them in wildlife-friendly ways. There's a growing recognition that farming and nature aren't separate realms. They are intertwined, whether we like it or not. But managing a hedgerow well is a craft. It isn't simply a case of leaving it alone forever. A hedge that is never cut can become gappy at the base, turning into a line of trees with little shelter for ground-nesting birds. On the other hand, a hedge that is flailed hard every year, cut back to the same height and width, can become thin and lifeless, offering little blossom and few berries. The sweet spot, as with so much in land management, is nuance. Traditional techniques like hedge laying are making a comeback, and they're fascinating. In hedge laying, stems are partially cut and bent over, woven along the line of the hedge, sometimes staked and bound. It looks brutal at first, as though the hedge has been attacked. Then, over time, it responds by sending up new growth, creating a dense, stock-proof barrier. Different regions have their own styles. Midland bullock, south of England, Welsh, and so on. It's a bit like dialects, but for plants and people with billhooks. There are competitions too, where hedge layers work with astonishing speed and precision. If you've never seen it, it's well worth it. Watching someone lay a hedge is oddly calming, like seeing order restored. Hedges also shape culture in subtle ways. Think of how many British place names and expressions are tied to hedges and boundaries. We talk about being hedged in, or hedging our bets. We have hedge schools, hedge witches, hedge knights in fantasy novels. Even the idea of the hedge suggests the in-between. Not forest, not field, but a liminal strip where interesting things happen. For children, it's a place to find sloes for sloe gin or blackberries for a pie, assuming you don't come home scratched to bits. For writers, it's a ready-made setting. Secret meetings, hidden gates, the sense that something could be watching. And speaking of watching, the hedge is busy with life if you know how to look. In spring, listen for the riot of birdsong at dawn. In early summer, you might find cow parsley frothing along the edge and bees working the blossoms. In autumn, there are rose hips, elderberries, and the last wasps, slightly drunk on fermenting fruit. In winter, a hedge shows its skeleton, a tangle of stems, and if there are leaves left, they rattle in the wind like paper. Even then, it's not empty. You might spot the neat round holes of a vole run, or the tracks of a fox threading along the base. If you're keen on a more forensic approach, hedgerows can be read as indicators of local soil and geology. Beech in a hedge might hint at certain planting choices. Elm, where it survives, tells a story of disease and resilience. Alder suggests wet ground nearby. In chalky areas, you'll see different companions than in heavy clay. It's countryside literacy. Once you've learned a few species, a walk becomes less like strolling through scenery and more like reading a very long, very patient book. Of course, hedgerows aren't universally loved. They take up space. They require time to manage. They can shade crops along field edges. They can harbor pests as well as beneficial insects. A farmer under pressure may see an overgrown hedge as yet another task, another cost, another thing to be judged on by people who've never tried to run a business with unpredictable weather and volatile prices. That perspective is fair enough, and any serious conversation about hedgerows has to include the realities of modern farming. The clever bit is designing incentives and support so that hedgerows aren't a sentimental luxury, but a practical asset. If a hedge reduces soil loss, that is money saved. If it supports pollinators, that can improve yields in certain crops. If it reduces flooding, it protects infrastructure. If it stores carbon, it becomes part of climate accounting. In other words, the hedge can earn its keep. There's also a question of quality versus quantity. Planting new hedgerows is excellent, but not all hedges are equal. A single species line of fast-growing shrubs may look green, but it won't provide the same richness as a diverse, well-structured hedge with trees, a wildflower margin, and sympathetic cutting cycles. Diversity creates resilience. If one species suffers from disease or drought, others can fill the gap. It's the ecological equivalent of not putting all your eggs in one basket. Let's make this personal for a moment. If you live in Britain, you've almost certainly been guided by hedgerows without realizing it. They shape where roads go, where footpaths bend, where villages begin and end. They mark invisible histories, old parish lines, medieval fields, forgotten property disputes. They also influence how we feel in the landscape. A lane enclosed by high hedges can feel like a green tunnel, intimate and slightly mysterious. In summer, it's cool and shaded. In winter, it can be pitch dark at 4 in the afternoon, and you may find yourself thinking you should have brought a torch. If you've ever cycled along a hedge-lined lane and been slapped in the face by a wet branch, you'll know the countryside has a sense of humor. So, what can an ordinary person do besides admiring hedges and occasionally swearing at them? Quite a bit, actually. If you have a garden hedge, you can manage it with wildlife in mind, cutting less frequently, avoiding trimming during bird nesting season, allowing it to flower. You can plant mixed species rather than a sterile monoculture. If you walk regularly, you can notice hedgerows and talk about them. Attention is a form of value. And if you're involved in local councils or community groups, you can support roadside hedge management that balances safety with ecology. Hedgerows, in the end, are a British invention in the best sense. Practical, understated, and full of unintended beauty. They aren't grand like castles or cathedrals. They don't shout. They simply persist, performing a dozen jobs at once. Boundary, habitat, windbreak, pantry, corridor, archive. In a world that's often obsessed with the shiny and the new, there's something rather moving about a system that works because it's alive, slow-growing, and, when properly looked after, essentially self-renewing. Next time you're out walking and you pass a hedge, pause for a moment. Look closely. See if you can spot the mix of species, the old bank beneath, the little gaps where something has squeezed through. Listen for rustling. You might find that what seemed like a scruffy border is actually a bustling neighborhood, and you, briefly, are the visitor. Cheers for listening, and I'll see you next time.